Now it's time for the 2010 NFL Draft. As you can see, we have the top 16 picks. We'll go through the first round with each selection, and then we'll just go by round. So starting off with the first overall pick in the 2010 draft, we have Josh McDaniels and the New Orleans Saints. And they decide to go with quarterback Tim Tebow out of Florida. So this is a big surprise here. Instead of taking Sam Bradford, who is seen as the consensus number one overall pick, Josh McDaniels thinks that he has outsmarted the NFL by going with Tim Tebow. Now, I did put a lot of thought into this decision because I figured, Josh McDaniels has not always made the best choices. So I thought, okay, Tim Tebow would fit into a Josh McDaniels pick. Also, Josh McDaniels, when he was with Denver, did draft Tim Tebow. So there is that past connection. But then I was thinking, what would have happened if he had the choice between Bradford or Tebow? And so when I was looking at the comparison between the quarterbacks, Bradford at the time was struggling with shoulder injuries. And so he played 31 games from his freshman year, and Tebow played 55. They also looked at, when I was looking at some of the comparison between the two, Tebow had significantly more stats than Bradford, just because, maybe not significantly, but like 900 more yards, he had more touchdowns, fewer interceptions, and Bradford threw more interceptions in fewer games. So there was a major comparison between the two that was done. We see that Tebow might have been seen as more durable, he can run and pass, whereas Bradford seemed to be more of a prototype NFL quarterback. But for this first pick, we have Tim Tebow going to the Saints as the number one overall pick in the draft. Next up, we have the Denver Broncos on the clock with Jim Fassel at head coach, and the Denver Broncos select quarterback Sam Bradford. So they miss out on Tim Tebow, but pick up Sam Bradford. They are likely to now trade Derek Anderson. I guess they were probably hoping that Sam Bradford would head to Denver. He is greeted with a decent team around him. There's Deuce McAllister at running back. And so we'll see how this team functions with Sam Bradford at quarterback as opposed to Derek Anderson. Next up, we have Washington. And with their third overall pick, Washington selects defensive end Derek Morgan. So I took Morgan a lot higher in this draft. That's because although I could have taken Ndamukong Suh or Gerald McCoy, I thought that they needed a pass rusher. They already have Tommy Harris at DT. And although I could have drafted two good DTs for them, I decided to go with more of a need, which was Derek Morgan. So the first pass rusher, the first defensive player off the board is Derek Morgan. Next up, we have the New York Jets. And the New York Jets select Ndamukong Suh, defensive tackle from Nebraska. So now the Jets have their tough interior lineman. He's going to be a major factor for them in this upcoming year, especially in a division with the Patriots. So Suh can be a decent pass rusher. He's a run stopper. He can do it all. Then we have the Cincinnati Bengals on the clock with pick number 5. And the Bengals select defensive tackle Gerald McCoy out of Oklahoma. So this is a team that wants to solidify their defense. They have Tavares Jackson now at quarterback. We'll see how long he stays there. We have Noshawn Marino at running back. They just signed Dante Stallworth at wide receiver. They have Tony Gonzalez at tight end. They traded for Matt Light from the New England Patriots at left tackle. So they have a lot of decent pieces on offense. Now they have Rashawn Mathis at cornerback in one of their first drafts. He has been a solid contributor for them, a defensive rookie of the year back several years ago. And now they're going to get their big man up front. Then we have for the Baltimore Ravens with the 6th overall selection, and they go with wide receiver Demaryius Thomas. So they've been needing a solid receiver. They signed Chris Chambers from the Texans, but now Matt Schaub has a decent weapon from Georgia Tech, Demaryius Thomas. With the 7th overall selection, the Oakland Raiders select cornerback Joe Hayden out of Florida. So Hayden here is actually a good pick for the Raiders and Bobby Petrino. I thought about giving them a bad option, but I thought, you know what? They need a cornerback. Joe Hayden fits very well in this pick, in this selection. And so I thought Hayden went 7th overall in the real draft. Now he's going 7th overall in this draft. Next up are the Cleveland Browns. And the Cleveland Browns select with the 8th overall pick, center Marquise Pouncey out of Florida. So we have 3 Florida picks in the top 8. In real life, Mike Holmgren went with Joe Hayden, and then he went with TJ Ward in the 2nd round. He wanted to build Cleveland's defensive backs. Then the following year, he built Cleveland's front 7 with Jabal Sheard and Phil Taylor. But in this franchise, last year in 2009, the Browns already drafted B.J. Raji, and so he was their defensive tackle. And I thought, since Joe Hayden went, I didn't want to go with like a Kareem Jackson or a second cornerback. And I thought, well, they never drafted Alex Mack. So they have Joe Thomas. Now they have Marquise Pouncey coming in at center. Maybe a little bit high for a center. Maybe it's not a pick that Mike Holmgren would have made. But I thought, let's go ahead with Pouncey with the Cleveland Browns to give them that solid center moving forward. Now, with the 9th overall selection, the San Francisco 49ers make a trade. They decide to trade back from the 9th pick to the 16th pick. And all they did was give up a 4th round pick, or the Dolphins gave up a 4th round pick in the process. The 49ers were pretty content with where they wanted to go with the draft, did not see the value, whereas the Dolphins wanted to move up. And with that 9th overall pick, the Miami Dolphins select left tackle Trent Williams. So Trent Williams was kind of dropping. I know I think he went 5th overall pick last time to Washington. Miami was a team that they do have a decent left tackle, but they could have used an upgrade. I think their current left tackle was about 33, 34 years old. So now getting Trent Williams allows them to get their left tackle for the future, and they believed a 4th round pick to move up was well worth moving up. Then we have the Dallas Cowboys, and the Dallas Cowboys select free safety Eric Berry. Dallas relatively were set with their defensive backs. Their safeties were not bad. However, I was not going to let Eric Berry slip more than he was. And so Dallas decides to take the defensive back prospect from Tennessee to help with their pass defense. Then we have the New York Giants on the clock with the 11th overall selection. The New York Giants select Ryan Matthews, running back out of Fresno State. So the New York Giants had Tiki Barber to start out my career 8 years ago. Then they brought in Jamal Lewis. Then they traded for Michael Turner, who was with the Panthers. And now they got to the point where they had one of the worst rushing attacks in the league because they had old running backs. So they released Jamal Lewis. They still have Michael Turner, but now they drafted Ryan Matthews to be their leading rusher, to be their top guy in the running game. Some fresh legs in an old running back room. Next up, we have the Chicago Bears picking with the 12th overall selection, and they decide to go with middle linebacker Rolando McClain out of Alabama. So as we know from history, he's not going to pan out well. He did go to Oakland in real life. But here, Chicago needed to help their defense. They're not really the Chicago of old. Brian Urlacher retired earlier than he did. Some of the defensive prospects they had did not turn out as well as they wanted. Kevin Williams, the DT, left them this offseason. So they needed to get some talent here on the defense. And so they bring in Rolando McClain, thinking that the best middle linebacker is taken, and they're going to take him in with the 12th overall pick. Then for the 13th overall selection, the Seattle Seahawks select outside linebacker Koa Misi out of Utah. So Koa Misi is a great pick here. Seattle needed some linebacker support. Linebackers are one of the positions that have the least amount of talent. So whenever I go into the draft, linebackers tend to be in high demand. So Seattle gets probably the best outside linebacker, the most talented linebacker perceived in this draft in Koa Misi. Then we have the Houston Texans on the clock. And with the 14th overall selection, the Texans select halfback C.J. Spiller out of Clemson. So in real life, Spiller went before Ryan Matthews because CJ Spiller went to Buffalo and Matthews went to the San Diego Chargers. But in this reality, Giants had Matthews at a better as a better scheme fit. And then CJ Spiller was a good fit for Houston, where they had Cedric Benson, who is getting older. They have Willie Parker, who's getting older. Arguably, both of them could be running backs past their prime. So Houston wants to get some young, fresh legs. They want to get a powerful running back who can also be a good pass catcher, and that is CJ Spiller. With the 15th overall selection, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers selecting offensive tackle Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis is out of Rutgers. Now, you might have noticed that I did not draft Russell Okung for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And that's because Okung is a left tackle, and we already have Robert Gallery, who is 30 years old. But Gallery was selected as their left tackle. I was not about to replace Gallery with a left tackle, so I went with an offensive tackle on the right side of the line, which was Anthony Davis, to help Tampa Bay. Next, we have the 16th overall selection with the San Francisco 49ers. And with the 16th overall pick, San Fran selects wide receiver Dez Bryant out of Oklahoma State. So the 49ers, other than Santana Moss, haven't really had a solid wide receiver. They had Reggie Williams, who was drafted in 2004, I think, because it was Roy Williams and Reggie Williams, and the 49ers ended up going with Reggie Williams at the time. But they've needed a solid receiver, and they haven't had that. And now that Santana Moss left them this offseason, and he was 31 years old, they needed to really get a solid wide receiver. And I think Drew Brees and Dez Bryant are going to be a fantastic combination moving forward. Next up, with the 17th overall pick, the Buffalo Bills select cornerback Kareem Jackson out of Alabama. So this was more of a BPA pick where Buffalo has some decent pieces. They still have some improvements they need to make. But getting Kareem Jackson is a solid cornerback for them, especially in their wide receiver or in their cornerback room that is getting a bit older. We see Kareem Jackson being some youth to that defensive back room. I think is a good pick for them moving forward. Next, we have the 18th overall selection. The Green Bay Packers select offensive tackle Russell Okung. Now, Green Bay has signed Otto, I think, at left tackle. They have about some 70, 72 overall tackles. And I thought that Green Bay is definitely a team that could use some more talent on their offensive line to protect Sam Bradford, to help run block for LeSean McCoy. And so I think that was a very solid pick for Green Bay, and I think Russell Okung dropped more than he probably should have. Then with the 19th overall selection, the Tennessee Titans select tight end Jermaine Gresham. So with this team making the playoffs in the past 2 years with Kevin O'Connell at quarterback, they are set with running back Jonathan Stewart, who almost carried the team in the last part of the season. And they also have Anquan Bolden and Greg Jennings, who were top receivers, and Matthew Slater, who became a very solid kind of slot receiver for them, wide receiver 3. What they haven't had was a real tight end. Chris Cooley was supposed to be the guy, but he just wasn't. And Chris Cooley ended up going to, I believe, Green Bay in the offseason, I think. And so we have Jermaine Gresham coming in to be a solid pass-catching tight end for the Tennessee Titans. And I think it's going to give a red zone target for O'Connell that he hasn't had ever. Next, we have the Jacksonville Jaguars selecting on number 20. And with the 20th overall selection, the Jacksonville Jaguars select strong safety Nate Allen out of South Florida. So the Jaguars pick up a Floridian, and they pick up a defensive back for their secondary. Now, one significant player that has not been drafted yet is Earl Thomas. And so, in this instance, Earl Thomas probably would have been the better pick, but Jacksonville is going to be Jacksonville, right? They went with the strong safety over the free safety, but Nate Allen's probably more of a fit for Jacksonville than Earl Thomas. Next, we have at the 21st overall selection is the St. Louis Rams, and they go with running back Toby Gerhart out of Stanford. Yes, Toby Gerhart in Madden is listed as a fullback. But I remember at the time where they saw Gerhart as a solid running back that would be a bruiser. And so I figured, you know what? I'm going to boost his draft stock a little bit, and we're going to put him in the first round. And I think the Rams fit that mold the best, where you got Greg Williams, who may not always draft that well. We know that with the Matt Leinart pick. So with that, I thought, you know what? Let's give the Rams, who do need a younger running back, give him Toby Gerhart, where he can be that bruising back. Then we have, with the 22nd overall pick, the Pittsburgh Steelers select Dan Williams, defensive tackle from Tennessee. So Pittsburgh just adding more depth to their already pretty solid defense, but they've been needing an interior defensive tackle. I've stuck with Casey Hampton as long as I could, and then he ended up leaving in free agency, and now they get a fresh new defensive tackle, run stopper, and Dan Williams. So looking forward to seeing how he contributes to Pittsburgh's defense. Next, we have the Detroit Lions selecting with the 23rd overall pick, and they decided to go with offensive guard Mike Iupati out of Idaho. So this was one need that they needed on their interior offensive line. They've got their quarterback in Brody Croyle, who did sign a 4-year extension, about $93 million. So, I mean, he could have been signed for much cheaper because he's a 66 overall. But I wasn't going to give him modern day elite quarterback money, but I wanted to give him a solid contract of he's getting about 15-ish million a year. Maybe around, it was about 15 in salary. He might be getting around 20 some plus a year. But that's just because he has delivered for the Lions, taking them to the playoffs on numerous occasions. They were the top NFC North team. They have decent talent with their running backs and Reggie Bush and Danny Woodhead. So I thought, let's get some infrastructure for this team and get the offensive guard. Then the Carolina Panthers are on the clock, and with the 24th overall selection, the Panthers select cornerback Devin McCourty out of Rutgers. So this was a team that, as I've mentioned before, they are the top defense in the league, the second to the Atlanta Falcons. But the one area that they struggled the most was their cornerbacks. Both their safeties are 80 pluses. Their pass rushers are the best in the league. They have, from Peppers, and they have, I forget who their left end is, but he was pretty good. They have Chris Jenkins at defensive tackle. They had solid linebackers, but their cornerbacks were in the 60s. Dre Bly. I had some young talent. I drafted Alfonso Smith, I believe, last year, but he did not develop. So Devin McCourty is going to be the starter here in Carolina. He is 74, 75 overall. Very much needed to help this defense in an area that really cost them in the playoffs because they got beat by, I believe it was Arizona. I can double check real quick. Hold up. Let me see real quick here. Yeah, there was Arizona, knocked him out in the first round because Arizona was able to pass all over them with Calvin Johnson Jr. and Steve Johnson. They had a solid passing attack against the Panthers, who could not defend against it. So now we have a cornerback added to that Carolina Panthers room. Then with the 25th overall selection, the Indianapolis Colts select outside linebacker Sean Witherspoon out of Missouri. And so we have Sean Witherspoon, a much-needed defensive prospect there. The Colts are pretty much set in a lot of their positions. They could use some support with the wide receiver, which they will try to address later on in this draft. But they look at getting a solid defensive player, and that is Sean Witherspoon. Then we have the Philadelphia Eagles on the clock, and with the 26th overall selection, the Eagles select free safety Earl Thomas out of Texas. So this was a prospect who could not keep slipping. Now they do have Brian Dawkins at free safety, but Dawkins is in his 30s. So I think Earl Thomas is a good replacement for Dawkins, whether it's this year or next year. I might put Earl Thomas in at maybe like a sub safety or the slot cornerback. I might try to get him some field experience. But Dawkins will continue to start, but Earl Thomas might get some plays every now and then. Or maybe if the Eagles don't have a great season, he can start, or if he starts to surpass Dawkins in talent. Next, we have the Atlanta Falcons on the clock. And with the 27th overall pick, the Falcons select middle linebacker Darrell Washington. So Washington is now the middle linebacker for the Falcons, who needed to kind of fill some gaps on their defense. And even though they are one of the best pass defenses, because they have like 2 to 3 good cornerbacks, some top-notch safeties, some good pass rushers, middle linebacker, as I mentioned before, linebackers are in high demand. And so when you are a team who have a lot of solid pieces and you need to fill that gap, you need to fill some small points, linebacker is where you want to go. Then we have the San Diego Chargers selecting, with the 20th overall pick, cornerback Kyle Wilson out of Boise State. So here, when you're one of the top teams, it's hard to find where do you have a real need. And so in this instance, the need is just to find the best player available, and Kyle Wilson was that player. And you can never have enough good cornerbacks, especially in my franchise where there is a lot of passing. Then with the 29th overall pick, the Kansas City Chiefs select defensive end Jason Pierre-Paul out of South Florida. Now, Pierre-Paul could have gone much earlier, maybe should have. Chiefs desperately needed a defensive end, and so they get that with Pierre-Paul. So looking forward to seeing him in that Kansas City Dick LeBeau defense. Now, the first of 2 picks for the Arizona Cardinals in the first round, they traded Andre Johnson to the Patriots and they got a first-round pick and a third-round pick for Andre Johnson. I'll talk more about that on the 32nd pick. But with this first 30th overall pick, the Arizona Cardinals select defensive tackle Tyson Alualu from California. This was a guy who perceived to have been dropping in the draft, because I think the Jaguars picked him in the top. He was a 10th overall pick. So he slips in the draft in my reality. So he goes to Arizona to give some more depth to their defensive line. He's not going to turn out to be that great DT, or at least in real life he didn't. But Arizona takes their chance with him. And now we have the Minnesota Vikings on the clock with the 31st overall pick. And with this pick, the Minnesota Vikings select tight end Rob Gronkowski out of Arizona. Now, Gronkowski went in the second round in real life to the Patriots, and now he is going to be catching passes from the tail end of Brett Favre's career in Minnesota. Possibly the best player in this draft, but one of those things where I drafted him around where he went in real life, that second round or pick, but I boosted them up a little bit because I figured Minnesota might take the risk on a tight end like Gronk, and I think it's going to pay off quite well for them. And now we have the Arizona Cardinals back on the clock. Patriots, I guess, made the right move trading for Andre Johnson because they won the Super Bowl. And they gave away their first round pick, which who cares if you win the championship. And with this 32nd overall pick, the Arizona Cardinals select offensive tackle Roger Saffold III from Indiana. This is not going to be a great pick, but he did go. In real life, he was the first overall pick in the second round. And so this was not far off from where he was drafted in real life. But the Cardinals just went with a BPA in this instance. They do have decent tackles already. He might not start this year at all. But I saw him as if you're a good team, you're going to build up. Okay, let's develop our talented offensive tackle so he can be the tackle of the future. And that's what they did here. And now we get to the rest of the draft. As you can see in the second round, Pat Angerer goes to the Saints, and he does not turn out well for them. I mean, I think he's like a 56 overall, 58. So they definitely reached on him, but he might actually start for them. I'm not opposed to having him be their guy because, again, I don't draft based off of overall. I don't play based on overall. I play based on how that team would think about their players and how they play in the game. Then Brandon Graham going to the Broncos. I think Broncos are 2 of 2 with good picks here. Sam Bradford and Brandon Graham, not just getting needs, but also getting significant talent. I'm going to go a little faster here, but we see Asamoah going to the Jets. Dixon, the next tight end, going off the board to the Cardinals. I probably would have had the Cardinals pick Gronk on the 32nd overall pick, but he went to the Cardinals instead, to the Vikings instead. And then we have Lamar Houston going to Baltimore, helping that Baltimore defense. Brian Beluga, which is actually 2 good picks for Bobby Petrino. I probably should have been a little dumber with the Oakland Raiders, but I decided to give him some decent picks there. TJ Ward, real life pick going to Cleveland. McCluster going to the Cowboys, and I might move him to running back. Ben going to the Bengals. Golden Tate, who is huge for the Bears. Bears headed into this draft with 2 wide receivers, and then they signed Nate Burleson after the draft, but I included him in the offseason, the free agency. So they needed wide receivers, and Golden Tate is going to be a great target for Mark Sanchez. Javed Best going to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We see Jimmy Clausen being the next quarterback off the board, going to Miami, who desperately needs help at quarterback. Tony Moecki to the Packers. Sean Lee goes to the Tennessee Titans, so Titans get a solid defensive contributor there. Brandon Spikes to Pittsburgh. Mike Kafka, where the Ravens traded for Matt Schaub. Matt Schaub's starting position is not guaranteed. If he struggles, I have no problem with giving Mike Kafka the option. Ben Tate goes to the Carolina Panthers with an aging Larry Johnson, and they do have Lorenzo Booker, who has been a great running back too for the Panthers. And actually, if the Panthers really consider it, they could decide to move on from Larry Johnson with Ben Tate and Lorenzo Booker. Eric Decker to the Eagles, who's rated a lot lower than I thought he would. He's a 61 overall. So whoever did the roster, I would have given Decker definitely a higher rating, especially for a slot receiver that he is and was. But he does go to the Eagles to kind of be that third, fourth wide receiver on a team that already has Ted Ginn and Deshaun Jackson. Cam Chancellor goes off the board much earlier for the Atlanta Falcons. I think he went in the 5th round in real life, but he was one of the top safeties. I noticed I've drafted a lot of safeties in this draft already. And then anyone else relevant? Patriots' first selection is Jerry Hughes, and that was Patriots basically just drafted to fill their roster, because at this point their cap space is so low that that's what they use the draft for. All right, I need a backup tight end. I need a backup DE. Well, that's what they do. So Jerry Hughes actually will likely be a starter because he's going to fill in for losing Richard Seymour, who went to the Arizona Cardinals, of all places. Then we go to the 3rd and 4th rounds. So Colt McCoy goes off the board to Washington to be sort of the backup quarterback with Josh McCown behind Michael Vick. They do have a new head coach in Marty Morningway, who was the offensive coordinator for the Eagles for many years, and the Eagles were so good, I just figured that he would have gotten another chance. Jimmy Graham goes off the board to the New York Giants. So now we have Carson Palmer with the Jimmy Graham option. Giants picking again with, and they got that pick from the Baltimore Ravens, I believe. Trying to remember what that was entirely for. But they do have that the 6th pick in the 3rd round. We see, other significant things to highlight. Joe McKnight going to the Miami Dolphins. Sean Laval going to Green Bay. James Starks, who was a real-life pick to the Packers. That running back goes there. Emmanuel Sanders goes to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And they still have Hines Ward, who is getting old. I kind of want to move on from Ward, but I don't really want him to go to another team. I kind of want Ward to retire as a Steeler. But I'll probably just keep Ward around. But Emmanuel Sanders and Malcolm Kelly is some young receivers that need to start getting more playing time in Pittsburgh. Carlos Dunlap to the Panthers, so another good defensive end to help develop that transition for their old defensive players to the new ones. We see Navarro Bowman going to Arizona, and then they get John Connor at fullback with the Patriots pick, so didn't really gain much out of that trade. Then we have Aaron Hernandez going to the New York Jets. I'm surprised how low he's rated. He was a better overall than he should be. He should not be in the 50s. Even though he's not the best person, he's a lot of harmful activity. I will remove him when it's time. But I'm surprised that he's in like a 58 overall. Aaron Hernandez and Rob Gronkowski were a dynamic duo for the New England Patriots. I might even up Aaron Hernandez's stats because he should be better than how he's rated. Let's see other significant things in the 4th round. Geno Atkins going to Tampa Bay, so the Buccaneers get him. Antonio Brown goes to the Green Bay Packers, and that is a great pick for numerous reasons. Right now, the Packers only have Julian Edelman as a real receiving option. They have James Jones, but James Jones is not a good starting caliber receiver. And so Mike Tomlin is the coach of Green Bay. So Mike Tomlin drafted Antonio Brown to Pittsburgh in real life. So Mike Tomlin drafts Antonio Brown to the Packers. Alterin Werner is going to the Titans. We got Jamarcus Webb going to Pittsburgh. LeGarrette Blount, the big man, is going to go to with Matt Forte in Atlanta. We see Dakota Watson going to the Vikings. Now in the 5th round, we have Austin Howard going to the Patriots. He was actually a good pick there. They get rid of Matt Light at left tackle, and they've got Jason Peters, and they have Sebastian Vollmer. So they don't need a tackle, but they needed a backup tackle, and Austin Howard is a hidden dev tackle, and so that's good for the Patriots. We see Corey Wooten going to the Titans. Victor Cruz, who was undrafted, does go to the Colts in this pick, so the Colts needed a decent receiving option, so they pick him up. Arthur Jones with the San Diego Chargers, and then Cam Thomas going to the Pats. Going to the 6th round, some less Barry Church going to the Rams. We see anyone else of relevance, anyone cares about. I mean, I'm sure if you see someone that you like, go for it. Not much talent here in the 6th round going. We see Thaddeus Lewis going to the Eagles, but that's not much of a pick. We see in the 7th round, Nolan Carroll II going to Denver, so he's a decent pick there. Mark Marini going to the Eagles, who actually is rated higher than Eric Decker, which again I think is absolutely nonsense. Let's see, Doug Worthington going to the Browns. And then Mr. Irrelevant is Frank Zombo, outside linebacker going to the Patriots. So I hope you enjoyed this overview of the draft. I will begin. I plan to do some team overviews heading into this season because I think it might be fun for you all to hear some of the ideas of how these teams are developed and how they plan to move forward. So thanks for watching.